What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brendan Schaeffer with you, breaking down some breaking news as the Cardinals have announced that Brendan Donovan, after missing the weekend series against the Yankees in its entirety, is now heading to the injured list with a groin strain. We knew he had the groin injury that he had been dealing with. There was also some reporting on a toe or foot injury that was kind of hampering him as well. The long story short, though, is that he's no longer going to attempt to play through that injury or those various injuries. And he's on the IL. Jose Fermin gets the recall from AAA Memphis, so he will presumably be with the Cardinals when they begin play in just a little bit of time here tonight. Down in Miami against the Marlins, I believe it's Matthew Liberatore taking the mound for the Cardinals. I think it's Yuri Perez going for the Marlins. Might have to double check that. But at any rate, let's talk about Donovan because it was kind of eye roll inducing, and it is Yuri Perez tonight, to watch the Cardinals over the weekend against the Yankees play short, play with less than their entire roster contingent because you had Wilson Contreras dealing with an injury. I had said as far back as last Wednesday, he was kind of limping into the Cardinal clubhouse pregame and was a guy that the Cardinals were trying to, find a way to get through it with him to avoid putting him on the injured list, right? And they have been able to do so. I believe Wilson Contreras, he is in the lineup for Monday night. So that they were able to kind of spare themselves from having to be without Wilson Contreras for a full 10 days. He's going to give it a go. The Cardinals will welcome him back into the lineup, and that's going to be exactly what you need. He's batting cleanup for the Cardinals on Monday night. In the case of Donovan, unable to get over the curve with him, and so he's going to miss time. It's retroactive. The IL stint is retroactive back to August the 15th, and so it's just kind of frustrating to look in retrospect, know that the Cardinals had some blown leads this weekend as they were swept by the Yankees, and they were playing without their full roster. They did make the roster move. Victor Scott II going on the injured list. Nathan Church made his major league debut yesterday, and he will be down with the Cardinals on this Florida road trip, and he is in center field starting as well on Monday night. So he's batting ninth for the Cardinals, his second consecutive start since getting the call. It's just crazy, though, to think about the way that this has been handled when it comes to Donovan. And look, I understand. I would be the first to tell you that Brendan Donovan is the Cardinals' best player. And if you think there's a chance to be able to avoid missing additional time with him, then by gosh, you want to do it. You want to make sure he is available to you as soon as possible. But when you also were dealing with the Contreras injury, and then you have Victor Scott II go down, the troops are depleted at this point in time. And the Cardinals, could have maybe used a guy like Jose Fermin. I guess you could debate the degree to which that's true to try and find a way to get at least one win over the Yankees. Maybe the bigger conversation is the lack of organizational depth that you have real confidence in if you're the St. Louis Cardinals to be able to sacrifice a guy like Donovan for 10 days. You'd rather be without him for 5 or 6 days, evidently, than risk the back end of that being another 4 or 5 days that you're without him, right? If you can try and work him through an injury, well, then that's worth it. Obviously, the Cardinals waited as long as they possibly could. They waited until they went on the road, and they said, yeah, there's no point in putting him on this road trip. Although, I guess I'm trying to think, a week from today, he'll be eligible to come back off, right? I guess if it's 10 days, he has the retroactive tag to August 15th. So then August 24th, I suppose, he would be available, maybe Sunday at the earliest, if that's 9 or 10 days. So point is, he's going to miss the road trip. And so that's why the Cardinals make the decision now. It's one of those things where, like, in a vacuum, I can't even really criticize it because the Cardinals don't have a minor league system and a 40-man roster teaming with these great options to come up and replicate production from a guy like Brendan Donovan. But it isn't a great look, right? It's not great optics to be playing with 24 of a 26-man roster. And they knew they couldn't go down to 23. It's why you saw the Nathan Church recall, and they had to be a little bit more aggressive with the IL for Victor Scott II after he injured himself trying to rob a home run from Aaron Judge, which would have been a fantastic play. And it's unfortunate that an effort play like that is how VS2 ends up on the IL. But it was just a brutal weekend in general, and this just kind of feels like another sort of, pinprick to the side after the Cardinals are swept by the Yankees. It's like, oh, by the way, you're not going to have Donovan for a week, and, you could have at least had somebody come up from AAA for the weekend series, and you didn't do that. So It's a little bit of roster mismanagement. It's a little bit of, I'll be fair to the Cardinals. Like I said, you know that Donovan is among your best players. And so if you can get him for 4 days that you otherwise wouldn't have had him, then it's in their mind worth the try. But I don't think that would be as true if the Cardinals just had a more robust 40-man roster. And that's what sort of bothers me about the conversation when it pertains to this offseason 40-man crunch that is being sort of bandied about by John Mozeliak in radio interviews, where he says, can't bring up J.J. Weatherholt yet. Or he didn't say you can't do it, but he threw cold water on the idea of it. And not because he's saying he's not ready. And that's what bothers me the most. If he had just said, we think JJ would benefit from some additional seasoning in AAA for reasons X, Y, and Z. Or maybe you don't even give the reasons because you don't want to, have the perception of anything negative that you're saying about the prospect. But if he had gone that direction, it's different than saying it may not be in the best interest of the organization to bring him up because it's not his protection year. Of all the John Mozeliak quotes over the years where he puts his foot in his mouth, this is one of the most puzzling ones to me, because there is no realm in which protection year will be utilized as a means to hold J.J. Weatherholt back. Like, if you're waiting for his protection year, if my math is correct, you'll be waiting until basically 2 Septembers from now, saying, well, going into 2028, we've got to add him to the 40-man roster. It's his protection year from the Rule 5. That is not the way that it's putting the cart before the horse. That is not the way that the J.J. Weatherholt MLB debut will be determined. It's just not. Granted, I've talked about this. If he doesn't want to clutter it up for Chaim Bloom, who has a lot of decisions he's going to have to make this offseason, in part due to the reticence that John Mozeliak shows when it comes to making any sort of decision. That's the mess that he has left his Mo's the predecessor, whatever the freaking word is for the guy that comes after you. That's what's going to be in the face of Chaim Bloom when it comes to this offseason and having to make some decisions. And so if you wanted to give him the maximum amount of flexibility, then that's maybe a reason that John Mozeliak has to kind of just eat it and not bring up Weatherholt, because he wants to give maximum flexibility to the next guy coming in to be able to maneuver the 40-man as he sees fit. And maybe the Cardinals come into spring training and JJ is great, and then they add him to the 40-man, and he's still starting with the team next season. But what's going to be required before that is a lot of moving parts and pieces being shipped off and room being cleared, not only in the 40-man roster conversation, but in the active roster and in the lineup, because you've got a lot of infielders that you're just not sure where they're going to fit in. And it's up to the next guy to decide. The Cardinals have made it abundantly clear it's not up to John Mozeliak to decide, because they have pushed off those decisions until November, when they were being asked about left-handed bats at the deadline, and they didn't move any of them. They said we would have to be blown away, and we weren't. Remember that conversation? So that's kind of where it's at with the situation for the roster clutter and the notion of a 40-man crunch. You've got 5 or 7 guys that are right now prospect status, and they are going to be Rule 5 eligible this winter. And so to ensure that you protect them from the Rule 5 draft, you add them to the 40-man. It's the protection year for those players, to use the phrase from John Mozeliak. But you've got a lot of clutter on this 40-man. And if you are in a situation where, to kind of bring this full circle, Brendan Donovan is clearly injured and it's a multi-day injury, rather than saying that's why we have a 40-man roster, we're going to bring up the next best man who's a good player that can contribute for us because we have great organizational depth. They wait and wait and wait, and then reluctantly, I mean, the optics of it are terrible, call up Jose Fermin, right? He's the guy that was evidently told or led to believe he was going to make the opening day roster and then didn't. So another example of reluctantly going to Jose Fermin, depending on what actually shook out with that whole situation. And look, I'm not trying to rag on Jose Fermin. He's had good numbers with the big league club this year. But yeah, I kind of feel what the Cardinals feel about the way you bring him in and you guarantee that you can't have Donovan for another week. That's kind of a bummer, because Jose Fermin is the type of player that he is. He's a guy that spent a lot of time in AAA. Largely over the course of his career, he's not flashed when he's been given big league opportunity. This year, he's done more, so maybe feed into that a little bit. But not an overly exciting option. And frankly, the Cardinals determined not the difference maker between a series win or even winning a game or two against the Yankees this past weekend. Because if they felt their depth was in such a place that the next guy they would call upon from the 40-man is capable of being that type of player for them and worthy of contributing over the weekend, then they would have maybe been a little bit more aggressive with the Donovan decision. So the Donovan decision doesn't happen in a vacuum, and I'm not overly trying to criticize it as just this, this obvious blunder in a vacuum. I will criticize it within the context of, it's another example of what they think of their 40-man roster, that they don't have the horses to come up and fill in and contribute in a capable and meaningful way. And if that's your perception of the 40-man, that you'd rather go with nobody for a whole weekend against one of the biggest, brands in sports and one of the largest well-known franchises in baseball. That's what you choose to put in front of your fans is 24 out of 26 over the weekend at home against the Yankees. And then you start to wonder why they don't show up to watch the games. That is just a further indicator for where the Cardinals are as an organization with this front office in the dying days of the John Mozeliak era. They could have been more aggressive, but by the time you get to this moment in time, you understand maybe a little bit of why they weren't, and it's because of the lack of organizational depth that has been built up to this point. Yes, J.J. Weatherholt represents some of that depth, but he's not on the 40-man. Why isn't he on the 40-man? Because John Mozeliak is worried about the crunch of the 40-man roster, saying we don't have to put J.J. on just yet because it's not his protection year. Okay, do we see how we're talking in circles a little bit? If the guys that are currently on the 40-man are so valuable to you, why are you unwilling to use them when you've got a player clearly out for 4 to 5 days? And you'd rather play short against the New York Yankees than IL that player in an appropriate timeline, bring up the next man up. If the next man up is not worth at least that, there's an argument to be made that he's not worth being on your 40-man roster. I'm not saying that about Jose Fermin. The Cardinals are coming about as close to saying it without saying it as you possibly can by the way that they have approached it. And it's not like they were down one player this weekend. It was two because you had it with Contreras. They're going to be able to get him back in the lineup, and so it's worthwhile. But you didn't have a guy to come up for Contreras and contribute, right? You didn't have a guy that you said, hey, he's on the 40-man. This is why we've got a 40-man. He's going to contribute. We're going to get Wilson right before we bring him back and try to rush him back, because that's what happens too, right? Donovan had a couple of days where he had to not play due to injury, and I think it was because of the groin. And then they say, well, now it's a foot thing. Okay, no, it's not. He's going on the IL with a groin. So there are times where I think I am as fair as anybody out there when it comes to showing the Cardinals' point of view and explaining why sometimes fans may be a little bit tough on Mo or on the coaching staff when it comes to certain things that optically maybe don't line up, but behind the scenes, there's a reason for them. This is one of those that, I'm sure there are reasons behind the scenes as to why they did it and why they approached it this way. But there does eventually come just the bottom line nature of it, where it's like, man, this is kind of what people are talking about when it comes to optics and messaging. You don't have to be totally forthright with your fan base and just, be out there with every single detail. But by the same token, when this is sort of the trend, that's where people, I think, do get frustrated. So Cardinals will be without Donnie. That's the bad news, right? Because he's one of their best players, and it's unfortunate that he's hurt. But if you knew he was hurt and you had the 40-man depth that seems to be so valuable that the Cardinals are clinging to it and using it as an excuse to not call up Weatherholt, because Weatherholt would be the obvious guy, right? You would bring him in for Donovan. He would be playing second base or third base for the entire IL stint of Brendan Donovan, and then Donovan comes back. And I get it. You don't want to yank JJ back and forth between the big leagues and AAA, but if JJ performs in that 10-day stint, there would be no yanking. There would be no Nolan Gorman taking playing time. It would be, let's move on to the future, because if this kid's ready and he's sincerely not being put into the lineup for reasons other than his progress and readiness, that's an issue. That's something that a fan base that, has had to deal with the malaise of several years of John Mozeliak's tenure, not having the organization put its best foot forward, or it asks you for patience and never delivers on it, and then is indignant about why people are upset or why people may not want to come to games. That's what we're talking about. That's what Cardinals fans would be harping on. So I wanted to jump on. I apologize that I've not been every day with B-Schaeff Daily lately. Frankly, I'm doing a ton of fantasy football content because this is like the 2-week period before the season where I have to try to build up some other brands and things that I'm doing. I've been almost daily on STL Sports Central as well. So if you are missing some of my longer form Cardinal content, I was just on with Mike Claiborne on that channel a few hours ago on Monday. So you can go back to their channel and check that out. Shout out to Rena, who gave us a really nice super chat, a super thanks on the channel. Appreciate you very much, and appreciate all our channel members for sticking with us and for consuming the content. So thank you guys so much. Going to get this video out real quick so you can watch it. Hopefully consume it before the Marlins series begins. And if not, watch it thereafter, and we'll continue to update you on B-Schaeff Daily when it comes to the Marlins and the Cardinals taking 3 games in Miami this week. Quick thought on that. I can't wait to see Matthew Liberatore tonight. I want to see what he does. Can he get back to sustaining velo through 5, 6+ innings? That's what the Cardinals need from him. And we'll see after the start whether he was able to do it and evaluate him from there. Appreciate you guys so much for tuning in, as I said, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.